All right, everybody. The Open Hardware Summit brand is all about starting on time. So we're going to be on brand and we're going to start on time. If everyone could come on in. If you need to keep chatting, it's fine. If you go out to the back in the sponsored area, that would be great. Look at that. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you everyone who's streaming live on the internet to the 2018 Open Hardware Summit here at MIT. It is super exciting for all of you to be here this morning. We have an amazing day of great presentations to talk about the thing that brings us all here, which is open hardware and all the ways that open hardware is improving the world, all the neat things that are happening in open hardware. And it's just an opportunity for the entire community to come together and talk about open hardware and explore what's happening with open hardware. I'm Michael Weinberg. I am the president of the board of the Open Source Hardware Association. I'm going to open up with a presentation about something that we're really excited about. I want to say a quick thank you to MIT, obviously, for giving us this space today. I want to thank Drew, who's in the back, who did all the work on these fantastic badges. So thank you, Drew. I am told that if you need to reprogram it, make sure there are batteries in it, obviously, and if you hit the button that's sort of like the application button, it'll turn it into an access point, and you can access it with your phone, update it however you please through your browser. So go ahead and do that. And then also a huge thank you to Addie, who is the czarina of the Open Hardware Summit, who has been pulling this together. So huge thank you, Addie. And to everyone else who's been doing so much work to make this happen. The summit doesn't just happen. It happens because all these people have come together, and it's really a labor of love. With that, I want to talk about something that's really exciting that we've been working on at OSHWA for, depending on how you count, at least a year, maybe more, and that is the new version of the open source hardware certification process. This is the thing I'm told, look, this is probably going to knock your socks off. There are socks in the swag bags if you need replacement socks. If this doesn't, which, it may not be the right thing for everyone, something today is going to knock your socks off. So we got backup socks for everyone. If you don't, get another bag in the back. We plan ahead at OSHWA. So I want to talk about the new certification. And this is something that I think is going to be a really helpful resource to the community, and really excited to hear your feedback about. Just some background, how did we get here? In 2015, we started hearing a lot from the community that there was a problem where there were a lot of people running around saying open source hardware this, open source hardware that, but it wasn't always clear what they were talking about when they were saying open source hardware, what definition of open source hardware they were building on. And so one of the things that we tried to do is we said, okay, if we put together a certification process where if you're creating open source hardware that complies with the community definition of open source hardware that OSHWA maintains, then you can apply for free. You can get an official certification, and that means you can put the certification logo on your hardware, and you can put your unique ID on the hardware. And so then people know when you're saying open source hardware, you mean the community definition of open source hardware. And when you're a user and you're looking at hardware that claims to be open source, you know if they're using the shared definition or not. So this is a really exciting thing. We put it together. We launched at the summit in 2016. And since then, I think it's been a great success. Right now, as of a couple of days ago, we've got over 200 pieces of hardware from 27 countries on 5 continents that's certified for open source hardware compliance. And that's just, that's a fantastic number. That's a really exciting number. Last year, it was 15 countries. Now we've almost doubled that to 27 countries. I think that really reflects how people all over the world are excited about open source hardware and excited to be able to say, I am doing open source hardware in the way the community expects, and I want to be able to talk about that. So with the old certification, everything was working. We think it's been adopted pretty widely, but it was the first version. And so we knew there were things that we could be improving. One of the challenges that we know remained was that information about open source hardware was sort of scattered. Over the years, OSHWA put together some great resources. Obviously, there's the definition, there's the frequently asked questions, there's the best practices guide, but each one of these things was put together at a slightly different point in history and had a lot of information, but it wasn't always clear where to go to answer the question that you wanted and which answer was exactly the most current and updated answer. So we had good information that was scattered all over the site. Another challenge, open source hardware licensing is hard. There are a lot of licenses. It's not always clear which license is appropriate for which situation, what you're licensing, what you can license, how all that works. I think it's safe to say that continued and continues to be a challenge for the community. There's also a design and usability problem. When we put up the first certification site, we wanted to get it up quickly to let people use it. And that means it was made up of Google Docs that were embedded in WordPress pages. It wasn't the most user-friendly website. And that was especially true for the certification directory. It was a spreadsheet embedded in a web page. That was a great way to get it up on the internet, but it wasn't a great way to find things that you wanted to find. And so we sat down and we said, okay, let's reimagine this process. Let's create something that is a really fantastic experience for a huge range of users, because we want to bring all that information together in one place in a coherent story, but also make sure that if you're someone who's new to open source hardware, there's a way for you to enter and to learn what you want to learn at the level you want to learn it. Or if you're a veteran of open source hardware and you want to take a deep dive into something specific, there's a way for you to do that. If you just want to get something certified, there's a way for you to do that as well. And so today we are announcing at the summit, I'm very excited for this, it's been a lot of work going into it, Certification 2.0. It's available right now at certification.oshwa.org. It's a bad thing for a speaker to say, stop paying attention to me and go to your phone. Or if you're on this live stream, open up a new browser window. But you can go ahead and do that. It's pretty fantastic, this new website. Let me talk about the new features that we have. So the first thing is we have learning modules. We decided to consolidate that information and organize it in a way that makes sense. So you can go to the hardware page, find out what it means when we're talking about open source hardware, learn what it means to do different kinds of licensing, understand what goes on when you're specifically open sourcing hardware or software. You can learn about branding. One of the really complicated questions and the important questions about open source hardware is how you can be open and still establish a brand that is durable and that is viable. So those modules will make it much easier for people to really engage with open source hardware. We didn't just want to talk about these things in the abstract. And so in addition to the learning modules, actually integrated into the learning modules, we have community examples. We took examples from hardware that's already been certified and say, hey, this is how these people thought about this question. This is how they decided to do licensing. This is how they decided to do documentation. This is how they're thinking about branding. So you can really look at specific community examples when you're trying to work through how all of these things work. We also streamlined the certification application process. Now, the certification application process, it really serves two purposes. The first is to apply for certification, which, again, remember, is totally free. The second thing is it really acts as a checklist. If you are working through the process of making open source hardware, as you do the application, you will make sure that you've done all the things that you need to do under the community definition. So the new application is much more streamlined, much more accessible. We think it's going to be much easier for people to use. We're also trying to bring some licensing clarity to open source hardware. I hope we're succeeding. I think this is a complicated area. It will continue to be a complicated area. But we're trying to do this in two ways. The first thing that we're doing is, as part of the certification application, we're asking you explicitly to tell us how you're licensing the hardware, how you're licensing the software, if there is software, and how you are licensing the documentation. So we're calling out to you, there are 3 different things you need to think about, and you need to tell us how you've thought about it. And second thing is, for each one of those categories, we're showing you recommended licenses. So you can see these are the kind of licenses that lend themselves to documentation, as opposed to these are the kind of licenses that lend themselves to hardware. Now, this is not the definitive list. There are plenty of licenses you can use that are not on the list, but we tried to narrow it down to make it easier for people to make quick decisions that are also informed decisions. And again, because we have those community examples, we don't just say, I don't know, pick a license. We show you examples of different kinds of hardware that have chosen to have different kinds of licenses. So you can say, okay, this is a hardware creator that I trust, that I want to follow. If they made this decision, maybe that's a good guide for my decision. And we're going to keep building out those examples as more people come into the certification. We also greatly improved the searchability of the listing of projects. Like I said before, up until today, if you wanted to do certification and you wanted to find a directory of what's happened before, you got a spreadsheet on a web page and Control F to figure something out. This is a much richer experience. You can search by country, you can search by category, you can search by license, you can search by a huge number of things, which means when you're getting started, if you're looking for hardware, it'll be much easier for you to find hardware that is relevant to you. We think this is going to be a really rich resource for the community going forward. So none of this would be possible without collaboration. First and foremost, from the community and the board and all the people who took time to do focus groups and to give us feedback and work our way through the process. Also, the Sloan Foundation, which recognized the importance of a resource like this and gave us a grant to really build this new website. The NYU Technology Law and Policy Clinic, who their students, as part of a project, did a lot of the initial writing of a lot of those educational modules. And so a lot of that information came from them. And then the team at Objectively, who helped us design the website, but not just design the site, really think through the experience and understand what we needed to do, take all this information and bring it together into a single coherent story. So this is the new certification. I think it's going to be really useful, really helpful. I hope that you take some time to explore it. It's certification.oshwa.org. Get your own certification logo. You can see the back of the badges. These are certified. You can get your own certification logo if you go through the experience. Try it, test it out, give us feedback. This is what I look like. If you had feedback today, come tell me. Tweet at us at OH Summit 18. We've got forums on the site. And more than anything else, please just use the site and use the certification process and tell us what else it needs and what would be useful for you going forward. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We've got a great lineup of speakers, and stick around for a great day. Thank you so much. Sure.
Hey.
That's like if you want.
And then what, this? Oh, fabulous. Okay. Thank you. So I'm next. Hello, I'm Eric von Hippel. Probably most of you don't know who the hell I am, but what I do is I study the economics of open as well as being a hacker myself. And so what I want to do is show you very quickly the economic underpinnings that actually are driving open. And what you'll see is that there are tens of millions of people who have personal incentives to do open, and they potentially might or might not be interested in, I love your bunny ears, might or might not be interested in joining the certification process, but it'd be important to think about. So what I'm going to tell you about is two kinds of economic arguments. And you can sort of say, okay, I'm really glad that this exists, and I will look back at it if I ever need it. What I'm giving you is a quick outline on how this works. And the economics behind the profitability of open design differs if you are designing consumer products or if you're designing industrial products. So let me jump into each in turn. Okay, so first the consumer case for open. This guy is named Joseph Schumpeter, and he was in the 1930s arguing that really producers were the ones who innovated. And the entire system, economic system of innovation support in governments and so on, has been built around the idea that producers innovate and consumers follow along. So now we're talking about consumers, household sector people. And the only role they had, consumers, in the traditional model is they might have needs. That's sort of okay. So I was a hacker, other people are hackers. I knew that wasn't true, you know. We all know it's not true. So we started doing, my colleagues and I started doing studies. To document that this wasn't true, we began to do national innovation surveys, nationally representative surveys so that you could project to the country as a whole. There are 10 countries now, here are the first 3, and I'll just stick to the UK column here. The UK was wonderful because the UK gives you money to do research even if they think it's really stupid. They thought the idea of consumers innovating was seriously stupid. So what we did was a survey and really carefully screening and doing all the things one does. And what do we find? If you look at that column, we find that 6.1% of the UK population was at home modifying or creating products for their own use. That's 2.9 million people. It is, in the entire UK, there are only 22,000 professional R&D people who develop products for consumers. So what this means is the consumers innovating for themselves outnumber the producers by over 100 to 1. Yet they're invisible in the economics because, number one, they shouldn't exist, and therefore nobody measures them. But this has been now brought forward, and we're measuring it, and we even got the OECD definition changed, so we're on the road. So the scope is huge. Basically what consumers do is they develop and improve anything they use. They're typically not developing industrial process equipment, but they're developing anything they use. And you all will know about this. So from medical to pet-related, sports and hobby, dwelling, everything. You all know examples infinitely. And what really goes on here is, this is an example of a Chinese farmer. You know, you and I are so proud we drag our suitcase through the airport and it has wheels. How cool is that? But this guy said, well, wait a minute, why shouldn't my suitcase drag me? And so he integrated basically a scooter with his suitcase and documented the fact that he could go through 22 kilometers of a Chinese airport, which is about the ordinary size of a Chinese airport. Hold on a sec, I gotta shut this off, sorry. Okay. Now, what happened next is very interesting, and this is characteristic. Namely, commercializers grabbed it. You see this thing on the bottom there, Moto bag. Commercializing people grabbed it. It was available for free from this guy. He did not protect it. And they did not mention him. So as far as everybody was concerned, and as far as governmental statistics were concerned, the Moto Bag company did this, right? So our statistics are distorted. And because, again, currently, the only time an innovation exists, according to statistics, and we're now getting this changed, is when it goes onto the market, right? So here's this guy, he develops, but he doesn't put it on the market. Who puts it on the market? Moto Bag. They say, aha, look, those producers are such geniuses, they did it again, right? That's how the data works. Okay, there are many other examples. I mean, users are doing things like developing the artificial pancreas ahead of producers. You all have your own examples. But here's what's going on. There are really two major innovation paradigms operating in parallel these days. One is normally open and one is normally closed. So the top arrow is the one I described to you when I say people innovate for themselves as consumers. They collaborate with others, as you all know, with open source software or open source hardware. And then they diffuse the design peer-to-peer. They say, hey, whatever, take it if you want. Because they don't protect it. Now, it's totally different. The bottom line is the producer innovation paradigm. And what we have there is this kind of interesting thing where it's all about the money. This is the Schumpeterian thing. This is Schumpeter saying you do market research, the consumers just sit there, the companies spend money for R&D, the companies spend money for production, and they sell it for a profit. And in order to do so, they need patents and intellectual property protection and all the rest of it, right? But now we have this interesting conundrum. What we see is consumers innovating and not protecting their innovations and finding it worthwhile. In other words, they are not being either religious about this or socially concerned or anything else. What they are doing is what makes best sense to them. And that is a wonderful platform to build sort of the open source hardware system upon. So let me go into that for a minute. Why can consumer innovators innovate on their own free time and using their own money? We've all gone into the basement or wherever we have a little workshop set up, and we've done this sort of thing, right? We've built stuff. Nobody's paying us to do it. It's leisure time. Why are we doing it? We did surveys of this. Well, I want to use it myself. I want to help others. I have fun developing it. You never saw anybody going down to the basement saying, oh, curses, I have to have fun again, right? And then they learn from developing it. A lot of people say, well, I want to learn software or hardware to use X, Y, or Z, and so that's an incentive to innovate too. Only a small fraction of the motive is to make money. And when you do a sort of cluster analysis of the people and their motives, what you find is that of these entire populations in these countries, this is Finland, you've got these users. The blue is personal need. Fun and learning is green. And what you see there first is that you've got users, 37% of the population of all innovators. Participators, they're doing it for fun. They're the ones building supercomputers in an alloy tin, right? Not very useful, but God damn it, I did it. And then you've got helpers. You've got people saying, I see somebody else with a problem, I'm going to make myself or them a diabetes device that'll help them. And then finally you have people who are the household sector entrepreneurs of tomorrow. They're the ones saying, they're only 9% of this population. They're the ones saying, hey, maybe I better protect this. I'm going to make some money from it down the road. So in other words, this whole tens of millions of people spending tens of billions of dollars in just these few countries we've measured so far, they are doing it for self-reward. Now that's kind of interesting. Nobody has to pay them. So you don't have to get into, how do I protect myself? It's the lowest cost choice for consumers who don't want to sell something. Why? Because if you invent something You can just throw it out on the web for free. You don't have to patent. That costs money. To protect something costs money. You just throw it out there. There's no need to invest to keep your innovation from others. The kinds of wonderful things that we see on the web now, you know, fathers and mothers who have a kid who has diabetes and they develop an improved device for that kid. They're not rivals with other parents who have diabetic kids. They'll be happy if the other people pick it up for free, right? And then finally, there is what some might consider the downside, no way to share in the profits if others commercialize what you developed. But you were sufficiently incented to do it without getting profits from others. So society is perfectly happy with this. Social welfare says, hey, this is fine. It's fine in two senses. If somebody else comes along and makes a factory and makes billions of dollars on what you developed, fine. They invested to do the next steps in the process to commercialize it. But also fine, you got what you wanted when you developed it for your own self-reward purposes. And finally, nobody's saying you can't commercialize too, right? Nobody's keeping you from saying, hey, I want to make money from this too. So what it is people make choices. And the choices they make, they're free to make. In my case, I have hacked on a device to protect my own tendon. It's better than the commercial devices because I had a strained tendon. I went into the surgeon. I said, hey, listen, this is better than what you got. He said, fine, that's wonderful. I said, do you want to have it? He said, no. I said, why? He says, because it's not FDA approved. Well, okay. Some commercializer has to do that. But my own opportunity costs are just to throw it out there in the web, and I don't want to deal with it further. I've got other stuff to do. All personal choice. Now, when you get into it, and if you think about trying to sort of interact between these two paradigms, what you'll see is, and I will briefly go over this, because how much time have I got anyway? I don't know how much time I have. I guess I have, what do I have? I have 15 minutes, right? Okay, so basically, I've got a free book out there, convinced MIT Press that if they gave it away free, they'd make so much more money. God. It's fabulous. They bought it again. But anyway, so you can download it for free. But anyway, in there, it explains all these interactions. You know, you for instance, mountain biking, right? What you've got is you've got a way to figure out, well, users do develop this stuff first, like sports equipment, medical equipment, whatever it is. So let's us as a producer be alert to picking those things up, right? Ways to do it. Fabulous sort of free kinds of complements to commercial stuff. Sticking with bikes again, the free innovators, the user innovators, the consumers, the bikers, were the ones who develop all this stuff in hardware. And companies grab it because they can make money from it. But at the same time, these users also develop mountain biking techniques. Because what damn good is a mountain bike without interesting things to do in riding it? There's no market in there for commercial producers. So what you really got is the commercial producers being complemented, that is, getting added value out of their bike sales because of techniques that users provide for free. Well, I'll quickly jump over this because we got other stuff to do. And but anyway, producers also can figure out how to create workshops for users to interact, consumers, you know, and feed into these systems more directly, like Steam Workshop and video games and so on. Okay, So if you're interested in consumer goods, that sort of explains the underlying economics. It's a better thing, whether or not, I'm always highly motivated by people at the Berkman Center and by people like you who have such nice social sort of motivations. I'm attributing them to you, all of you. You are so wonderful, may I say. But the interesting thing here is that you should know that your movement does not depend on these forms of motivations. It actually pays for these consumer innovators to go free, as I explained. And so for that reason, your movement can be robust and huge. When there are tens of millions of people out there and you've got a few hundred in this society, hey, room to grow, right? Now, let's talk again about producers. Producers have been the ones who are not supposed to be open. They're supposed to tie things down with patents because they need to make money from a monopoly. Well, recently, what's happened is open is also paying for producers when it's about the inputs they purchase. So let me explain. Many of you probably know about the open source data center hardware thing that Facebook, Google, and others set up, right? Do you know about that? How many of you know about that? You're saying no. Well, so basically what it is you have all these companies sitting there, and it's easier and easier to collaborate, as the consumer innovators have shown. And they're all sitting there buying a proprietary design of, let's say, data center servers, right? And so they're all paying IBM or somebody money for that proprietary design. So they look around to each other and they say, why the heck are we doing this? What we should do, since we're all buying the same kind of data center hardware, what we all really ought to do is get together and make it in an open source design, right? So that's the logic behind this kind of thing. And in more detail what they're doing, here's the basic story. So you have at the bottom, you have IBM, right? And then you have this group of companies that all buy, let's say, server software from IBM. And they say, hell, let's get together and make an open design, and we'll just sort of create white box hardware that can be produced by anybody. The interesting, and we've done papers and modeling and showing that this really pays. And then what we have is the next layer, who says, well, wait a minute, the kinds of things that these producers, the inputs to us that we hold in common, we could do the same thing. So what you have is each level of company in a supply chain looks at the firms it's buying from and says, wait a minute, that input is really expensive. Hey, let's make it open source. But those companies are also vulnerable because what they produce in the supply chain is inputs to the next people up. And those people are looking at it too and saying, well, wait a minute now, why don't we go open? So the trend is that we're going open on the commercial side too, which is fabulous. And free riders and so on pay. I mean, I won't go into the details of it, but basically, if you freely reveal something really, especially in hardware, something really happens interesting. People are always concerned about free riders, people who get to use stuff without paying for it. But when companies put out a design that's open, the interesting thing that happens is they destroy the design market of the proprietary producers. So they push everything towards open. It's fabulous. It's really great. So again, on the commercial side, what you got here amongst producers, what you've got again is this general shift towards open. This creates a huge community chance for you. Now, what can producers do when they can no longer compete on proprietary designs? Well, they can compete on something else, maybe, but it's very possible that producers, these giant corporations that have too much power and concentration and so on, are going to be severely damaged over the next 20 years and become less important. Because, you know, the conventional argument is, well, producers have an advantage in better production capabilities. But you know what? They're offering those capabilities to open source people who want to produce just small numbers of items. Economies of scale in production. Hey, but again, you know, a lot of these economies of scale are available in mass customization, like at Foxconn and so on. Better distribution sometimes. Well, yeah, but better savings on local production for local use. More popular brands. Somebody mentioned brands here. Yeah, but brands like Linux and Apache can be pretty cool too, and they're just growing organically. So it's all enormously fabulous. Did I mention it's enormously fabulous? And that's the story. So there are examples out there I won't go into where, in fact, people are already going entirely without producers in the hardware space. People are building, for instance, artificial hands for children. They have a network around the world of people who will print locally for children these designs in the right size and so on. And they're competing with producers who sell $7,000 myoelectric arms versus $35 hands. So it's all fabulous. Things are going in the right direction, and I will shut up. So here's the book that you can get for free and make MIT Press happy because you didn't pay them anything. And if you're interested in learning about that, but at least you're sort of aware of what's there. Okay, that's the end of my story. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, they lost it.
Straight HDMI.
Look at that.
Old school. Okay. Is this gonna cool? So can I do this, that? Okay. All right. Hi. My name is Surya Mattu. I'm excited to talk to you all today. I'm going to warn you straight up that I'm probably one of the less hardware-related people in this space, so I'm sorry about that. But I will hopefully tell you some stories that are relevant to the kind of work you do also. So a bit of background, I'm an artist and data journalist and engineer. I'm currently a resident at IBM. I'm at a place called The Markup, which most of you probably not heard of because we only came into existence on Monday. Hopefully you will eventually hear of us, but we will see, fingers crossed. And I'm also a research fellow at the Center for Civic Media at MIT. So the majority of the stuff I do is actually what I think of as like data-driven investigations. But before I kind of dive into the stuff I've learned doing that kind of work, I want to first prove my hardware creds by telling you that I once did this, which is that I went on a boat outside Mar-a-Lago and Wi-Fi scanned it to see how vulnerable the Wi-Fi they have over there is, and it turns out it's very vulnerable. As you'd expect, that's the Trump International Golf Club, also down in Florida. We did this in a bunch of places, it's all terrible, but turns out in 2017, the worst thing about the presidency is not the Wi-Fi. So what are you gonna do? Another hardware thing I did is I did this story a couple of months ago with my ex-colleague at Gizmodo, Kashmir Hill, where we basically built a router that collected all the network traffic going through a home, and she had like, I think, 16 different IoT devices connected to a place, and we just kind of looked at all the data that was going through it. And our kind of objective when we did this story wasn't so much to kind of see all like kind of security vulnerabilities. It was more to think about like, as a kind of regular user, what are the ambient emissions of your home when you're living with all these smart devices, right? So how often are your homes like pinging back to the servers and the companies and saying, hey, give me information, and how often are like those companies pinging your devices and saying, hey, we want to talk to you? Again, turns out there's a lot of stuff. The Alexa, I think, talks to its servers every 3 minutes, which was kind of terrifying. But yeah, I'm not going to get into that stuff. The code for all this was open source. Yes, we believe in that in the journalism world also, and we've had some interesting kind of findings through that. But what I really want to kind of make this talk about is this question that kind of drives all the work we do, which is, how do you fight injustice if you can't see it, right? So when we're talking about technical systems, especially in 2018, one of the biggest challenges we have is it's very hard to prove the bad stuff that's happening, even though it's very easy to hypothesize it. So it's very easy for people to say like, oh, if you have this kind of algorithmic system, these are all the terrible things that could happen. But when you don't have evidence, you kind of get stuck in this trap, right? And what ends up happening is stuff like this, where like in 2016, Mark Zuckerberg can come around saying, and I'm sorry, I'm going to do a little bit of Facebook bashing. I know we're all over it, but I'm going to try to take it in a new direction that maybe you've not heard of. So 2016, Facebook can come out and say that we had no idea that there's no way our algorithms could possibly be used to sway voters, right? It's just not possible. And then exactly 1 year later, he comes out apologizing for the kind of stuff that's already happened. And this is this one example of a pattern that's constantly repeated in the tech industry. And I think the root cause of that is it's very hard to in our kind of mindset around justice, it's very hard to decouple intent from accountability, right? So if you aren't intending to do something bad, how could you be accountable for the bad stuff that's happened? But my argument back to that is that the only reason we don't find the bad stuff is because we're not explicitly looking for it. And a lot of the work we do as data journalists is we're not, so like I think of this as like what I've been thinking of as like adversarial research, and like I bet a lot of people in this room, what it's really about is just like reverse engineering a system to understand its vulnerabilities and where it breaks, right? But the only difference is that in this sort of framing, especially in the data journalism world, along with the hardware and software, we also want to think about the people who are making those decisions, right? So the prompt for us often is, how do I say this? Yeah, so it's basically focusing on understanding not how the algorithms work, but explicitly focusing on who they harm. So I don't really care about like how a particular system works. It could have a lot of complexity and ML and data and blah, blah, blah behind it. But how does it actually play out in the real world? Because when these systems come out of their kind of incubated ecosystems, the values that are of that space are kind of imbued within these technologies, right? So what I mean by that is that like when companies come out and say, hey, we built a product, we had no idea it could be used in that way, it's because somewhere they didn't actually explicitly state how it should be used and what values they wanted it to have. And if this sounds very abstract, I'm now going to dive into an example of what I mean by this. And the example I'll dive into is an investigation I did over the last year with Kashmir Hill at Gizmodo around on Facebook's People You May Know algorithm. So does everyone here know the People You May Know algorithm? Is it all old enough to use Facebook, right? No one's so young that Facebook is like something dads use. Or if you are, that's cool too. But People You Know, for those who don't know, is the algorithm that basically Facebook uses to suggest friends to people, right? And when you look at the interface, it's super banal. It's just like in the top right corner. You don't really think much about it. But when you start thinking about it, this algorithm is one of the most the biggest drivers of how Facebook builds its business, which is actually just building its social graph. Right? So the way in which they connect us to each other that's their main asset, is that they have a social graph of like 2 billion people. And this is one of the ways in which they can actually really build that. And we've seen some kind of terrible stuff happen around us already. So Cash wrote a story 2016 where she talks about how psychologists and psychiatrists would be suggested that patients on Facebook, even though they had taken a lot of care to not like have any separation, and it's because we don't really know all the ways in which this is happening, right? But so we started with that, and she'd already written the story, and we were really curious in trying to understand how far this goes, like how this actually works. So what we ended up doing was I built her a scraper, and for like 3 months, we just like ran the scraper on our own accounts and just like scrolled through this page where they suggest you friends and like made a note of it in a CSV file and just collected it. We did it for like 3 months. It was really what we were hoping we'd be able to do, which we kind of knew we wouldn't, is we wanted to be able to say, hey, this person got suggested to me because I did this thing, or this person got suggested to me because of this hypothesis I may have. Obviously, it's really hard to do that because there's like 100 parameters that go into each of these decisions, and there's no way to know what the weights are for each one of those recommendations. What we did find though, so after 3 months of scraping and like lots of people collected, we didn't really find anything interesting, but we did find one interesting person, and that was a woman named Rebecca Porter. And that led to this story. So I have to read this because it always confuses me. But Rebecca Porter is Kashmir's great aunt by marriage. She is married to Kash's biological grandfather's brother. Her biological grandfather is a man who she has never met, with the last name Porter, who abandoned her father when he was a baby. Her father was adopted by a man whose last name was Hill. He didn't find out about his biological father, until adulthood. So this woman that Kashmir was suggested to on Facebook is related to a man who has a biological connection to her father, who her father has never met, and she didn't even know existed. Right? So it's kind of messed up that Facebook can do that. Right? And again, the beauty of the way these systems work is that they don't even know how they did that, or so they claim that they don't know how. There's no way for them to know how they did that. Right? And then we wrote this story, and we got a flood of emails from people talking about their experiences with people you know. And I didn't even think about this because I'm not a part of this community, but it turns out this algorithm is super harmful to members of the LGBTQ community and sex workers, because they work really hard to keep different parts of their lives siloed. And if they use the same smart device, then it's all gone, right? And there's no way for them to do anything about it. There's no like switch you can flick. There's nothing kind of implicitly in your, explicitly stated in your app that lets you kind of silo those things. And this is where like the kind of tension comes with the business model, right? Because Facebook is just thinking about the fact that, hey, we've got to build a social graph. Is it great when everyone's connected to each other? What they're not considering is, no, not all the time, no. Think about going to a dinner party and how many people you don't want to talk to, right? Imagine doing that at the scale of like humanity. It's terrifying. Obviously, this is going to happen. But they're obviously not thinking about that. So anyway, so we wrote this story, and at the end of the story, we talk about how you can opt out of this. So we emailed Facebook, we told them about the sum, and said, oh yeah, all you have to do is you have to kind of go to your settings and put this thing, go to this drop-down menu and select no one, and then no one will be able to discover you through your profile. We wrote that in the story, and literally like within minutes of the story coming out, people wrote back to us and said, hey, that setting doesn't exist on my page. So basically, this is what that setting looks like for most people. There is no one option. It just says, who can see your friend requests? Everyone friends of friends. Right? It's like this right here. And this has been something that's been, Facebook has been told about since like 2012. And people have written about harassers harassing them. Like there's so many examples of FTC complaints that, of course, it's all we can do. You can complain to the FTC. Have said that, hey, your drop-down menu is oppressive. Right? And they kind of don't give a shit. And what happened when we wrote this story was they said, oh, right, turns out we were wrong. We didn't really think about this. We got to write this awesome headline where people at Facebook don't know how Facebook works, because that's basically what they told us. The PR person was like, oh, yeah, it turns out that setting is now only available to people who we deem to be public figures, and it's not available to anyone else. Right? So we're like, cool, can you just like turn it on? Because we're literally telling you about how this is harming people. And said, yeah, totally. We totally hear you. We've made political data free. You can access it. We really believe in the harms of society. We got you. And then obviously like nothing happens. But then you start like digging into this even further, right? And start like understanding how these systems are operating and what the things are at play. The thing you learned about how these connections often happen is something called shadow profiling. How many people here know what shadow profiling is? Awesome. So shadow profiling is when basically person A, person B, person C. Person A and person C are on Facebook. person B is not on Facebook. Person A and person C have person B's phone number in their contact address. Facebook now knows about person B and through their contact number and knows that they're connected to person A and C. So whether you have consented to it or not, if you have ever shared your phone number with someone who uses Facebook, Facebook knows about you, no matter how much you have tried to not let Facebook know about you. Right? And this is just like a thing. It's not like a super scary thing or whatever. I don't mean to make it like super terrifying. It's just like this is just how the system works. And the reason it works like this isn't so much to do with the fact that they explicitly want to collect everything. It's like they haven't really thought about their business model outside the context of making money on a quarterly basis, right? And I think that's kind of the point of a lot of this, the thinking around this stuff. It isn't to, and especially with like this like open source hardware, which I think is so cool, is that the values are like an explicit part of the society, of the community you're building, right? We're all here in this room because you believe in something about this technology that's beyond just commodifying it out, like getting the product out. And I think like that's something that we need to see happen at a bigger scale, but like it's awesome that it happens in places like this. So yeah, so anyway, so we wrote this story, we found out all this terrible stuff. Facebook said we're totally going to change it. They still haven't changed it. And then we just did a deep dive into all the patents they have, which mentions friend requests. And it's like terrifying. They actually have a patent that says we can figure out if two pictures have been taken by the same camera without any metadata, just by looking at like the dust pattern and scratches on your lens, right? And these are like microscopic size things. So anyway, so this is all happening. What we ended up doing though was, as a part of our investigation, like, all right, we weren't interested with the people who may know stuff so much to understand how the algorithmic system works. We just wanted to hear the anecdotes of which kind of people does it harm. And so what we did was we built a tool there was open source. It's like an Electron app that you could download and collect basically your own Facebook friends recommendations every like 6 hours. So all this thing would do is it would go to Facebook for you and like go to that page with friends requests and just scroll all the way to the bottom, just scroll all the way and like make a note of it in a CSV file and save it for you locally. We got the app security audited, we got the app, it was all open source, so you could see that the data wasn't being sent anywhere. It was all locked down to be data that you're collecting for yourself, because there is no API for this. This is not something you can collect from Facebook's API. You cannot actually collect your own data, right? And obviously, so we wrote it, that's what it looks like. It's super ugly, but that's because I was the only person working on it. It was more of a political statement anyway, guys, so don't shit on my color schemas. But we wrote that, and then literally like the next day we got an email from Facebook saying, hey, you can't do this, it's in violation of our terms of service. Right? And we're like, why? We're letting users collect their own data. And they say, well, you're making them log into Facebook from a non-Facebook thing. That's not cool. You're letting them automate their own data collection. That's not cool. So you're violating our terms of service. And we're like, listen, we understand how those things are violations from the perspective of like competition or someone using this for business practice. But we made this code open source. We made this something that you can just like download, and we've got it security audited, right? Like that's more than most products on the market. Our intention is not for people to send us data. We like really put it in the bottom that like you find someone, no, they send us a tip. This was like a tip generator. It wasn't meant to be a data collector. But so this is what the response to us, which is that said, I discussed the general concept of the people you may know inspector with the team, and with respect to whether it is possible to build the inspector in a policy compliant manner, and our engineers confirmed that perhaps that our platform does not support this. Like that's kooky language, right? If you understand how technology works, it's like, what do you mean you don't support it? It's on my page, it's my data, so I'm going to take it. Right? And this is what I mean about like including human beings in the algorithmic systems we investigate, because surprise, surprise, humans drive all of this. Right? The technology doesn't actually, yeah, it's a good one. I know. I was very proud of myself when I found that. It took me a long time to cut that out at the right loop size, but I did it. But the point being that like the humans are always involved in some of this. And this stuff doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It happens because we're not explicit about the values we're putting into our technology. So I'm really excited to be here talking to you guys, because I know everyone here kind of believes that already. And I just wanted to give you like a, yay. Thank you.
that was scary. Our next speaker here. Give us a moment. We'll find the next speaker, and then the next speaker will begin speaking. All right, we're going to do a lineup shuffle. Prepare yourselves. Sarah Chips, are you here? Sarah Chips will probably be next, although if someone has like a really great 5-minute presentation they've been saving, this is your time to shine. If anyone has any questions about the certification, I'm standing here, so I'm happy to answer them. But if not, we'll pull together. Great question. Question is, if I certify on the older system, do I have to recertify? No, you do not. We ported over all the certifications to the new system, so you're all good. I will say, and we'll send out an email probably tomorrow about this, I do encourage you to double check your listing, because when we ported it, not all the fields were the same, so like most of it will be fine, but especially the licensing information, we had to make some educated guesses about what was going on, and so there's no rush, but if you have time, it's probably worth double checking your listing, making sure everything is right. If not, just write in and we can update it. It's not a big deal. But yeah, no, old numbers are still good. There is an issue around the UK numbers, because I didn't realize that the two-character country code for the UK is GB, not UK. So we're working on transitioning those, but that's an edge case. Other questions?
Just that I didn't get to find out, the speaker who just did a presentation, is that still available? Like, I found a GitHub for it. Is it still popular?
Is the app still available in GitHub? All right, we'll find out. We'll get you an answer. Probably yes, but we'll find out. And we'll put links. We'll have links to everything with the videos, so you'll be able to track it down. And then you too can poke Facebook in the eye. I'm not encouraging you to poke Facebook in the eye, but if you're so inclined, the tools will probably be available on the internet. Yeah?
Just temporary 5 minutes.
Yeah. Everyone shares it at OSHWA.
Yes, it's okay. Talking about indie hardware in Japan, from Sweet Science Tokyo. Just only five. Yes. Our company is running indie hardware market in Tokyo. You know the Japanese common indie designer is making themselves many unique products like this. This is a pen. No mechanics, no electricity inside, but you can see that some flicker from the mechanism injection molding. You can see the swimming pen, swimming person on the pen. This is made by the famous Japanese book author, not a professional maker and not a professional producer, but he wants to making things and share them idea. And other one, also DIY product in Japan, not so profitable. He made Motorola 6800 motherboard, not a 68000. 1970s, quite an old computer, but he making the loose kit, learning from the culture from the homebrew computer clubs. In Japan, in these 4 years, in Japanese DIY is quite popular to the selling in the market. You know already, Japan having a very strong otaku culture. He's saying the own comic book on the comic market in Japan. But now the young people and old people making things to share to the market from Sweet Science. Our company, Sweet Science, is running the marketplace for Japanese DIY. And our number of solding is getting bigger and bigger in this year, like this one now. This one is selling the market size on US dollar. We start to DIY market at 4 years ago, 2014. In this year, 1 year around 136,000 per year, means almost similar as one Toyota or one Hyundai. In last year, 2017, 4 times grown in this, 5 times grown in this 4 years. 6,000 means not so huge, but bigger than ever than in these 4 years. You know the Japanese manufacturing and economical services are still going down in this year. You can see New York Times or Economist in Japanese manufacture, maybe selling to China, bankrupt, failing. But DIY in Japan is still strong. Please come to Tokyo Maker Fair. You can see more and more people selling the product in Tokyo. Thank you.
Thank you. That was fantastic. I love that the Open Hardware Summit is a place where I can say, does anyone have a 5-minute presentation? And we have in-depth, data-rich presentations about the maker movement in Japan. This is why this is my favorite day of the year.
Yeah, I strongly believe hardware startup is very nice, but hardware startup is a job. Making things is a life.
There we go. That could be the theme of the day. We're pulling together the speakers, so thank you all for your patience. Are there other questions that people have while we pull? Oh, great. Sara is on her way, so if there's questions singular, we can answer it, or we can just bring her up now. Yeah, that's amazing. Love that. Quick question, yes. It's a great question. So what happens if someone tries to open source a hardware project that's sort of wrapped up in intellectual property? One of the core concepts that we worked through for the first version of the certification was this idea of your contribution. So the idea is you must open source everything that is within your capacity to open source. So if you've developed the chip, it's within your capacity to open it. If you've developed the firmware, it's within your capacity to open it. But if you are purchasing it or acquiring something from a third party, you have no ability to force them to open it. So you have to document, you have to make available to people in the BOM what's there. But as long as it doesn't require an NDA to access it, you have fully open sourced it. And so that is the kind of key distinction for open source hardware, is you're allowed to use parts that aren't necessarily open as long as you're opening everything that you have and you have the ability to open. So you ready? All right. We'll get you wired up to the screen.
Yeah, perfect timing.
This is probably the one you want.
My calendar is telling me I have a doctor's appointment right now. So,
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey everyone, how's it going? All right, great. How cool are these badges, man? I've been changing my name all morning. It's been pretty cool. So thank you so much for having me up here. I'm here from Brooklyn. I work at a company called Stack Overflow, and I also created a product called JewelBots that we're going to be talking about today. Today's Stack Overflow's 10th birthday, which is like 10 years of not having to read some guy's whole blog post before getting an answer to things, which is nice. So today's talk, I'm going to go a little bit about why I thought JewelBots is important, and we think JewelBots is an important thing to the world. I'm going to show you some magic, and then we're going to do a deep dive into the technology that drives JewelBots. So we're going to do this all in 15 minutes, so we're ready to go. So first of all, some hands in the audience. Are people here, who here is, like, has coded, knows how to code, has coded in the past? All right, so nearly everyone. So if you could raise your hand if you were under 20 years old when you started coding. Okay, so that's still pretty much everyone. If you were under 15. All right, that's about a third of you. If you were under 12. That's about 10% of you. Okay, so lots of people being really young and coding. Well, I'll get back to this. So one thing that is awesome about the world of 9 to 14-year-old girls is that they rule everything. And you might not think this is true, but I'm about to change your mind. Who here knows who this guy is? You know, you guys seen this guy? His name's Mark Weinberg. He makes hamburgers. Well, this guy used to be this guy, and girls around the world were like, this guy's going to be a star. I'm going to buy every magazine this guy is in. I'm going to buy every one of those albums. And now we get to see him in 1 out of every 25 movies. What about this guy? All right, you guys have seen this guy? Well, this guy used to be this guy, and I'm really happy to tell you that I'm one of the hundreds of thousands of young girls that made this guy a star. And who here listens to Taylor Swift? All right, I won't make you raise your hands, but we all know. We all know who discovered Taylor Swift. No one cares what us, 30-something-year-olds are listening to. Everyone is listening to whatever the teenagers are listening to just 6 months after they started listening to it. But even bigger than that, apps like Instagram, Snapchat, RIP Musical.ly, these were discovered by teenagers, not adults, right? The initial audience for all these applications, the places that we want to work, are discovered by some really influential folks, and they're really young. But their futures are at risk, as influential as they are. We all know that technical literacy is really important if you want to be competitive in the job field. And software developer roles and a lot of hardware developer roles as well are going to be growing in the next 10 years. But 18% of computer science graduates approximately are female, 19% of AP computer science test takers, and 15% of Google's tech force is female. So looking around in this audience, and a lot of the audience I've spoken to, I learned that people often learn to code when they're young. When I was talking to a lot of my peers who were developers and I asked them, when did you start coding? I heard often it was because of gaming or a community that they found when they were young that really got them into coding. And a lot of people, I learned some cool things. I remember when MySpace came out, it was the first time that I was cool to my friends because the fact that I was a software developer was cool because all of them wanted the glitter GIFs on their pages, and they were like, the only way, how do I do this? Teach me HTML. And so there's been lots of things like that, like Neopets, and now Minecraft is a great example of a product that is that's an open source community of kids teaching themselves Java, tiny little 8-year-olds with server farms running around and making mods for Minecraft. So we were like, okay, how do we do this and target people that identify as feminine and speak to their interests? So we talked to a lot of them. We went and talked to about 200 of kids in this age group. I went to some high schools and taught some free beginner electronics classes. Teachers get really excited about that because they don't have resources, it turns out. And met with a lot of girls and asked them what was fun to them and wrote things down and talked about them. And what we heard from them over and over again was they are obsessed with their friends. Their friendships, their friends are so important to them at this age. It's what identifies them. They spend a lot of time in community. That's why social apps work so well with them, because socializing is something that's so important to them at that age. So we took some ideas. We did a Kickstarter, like a lot of great hardware projects start out. I'd been a software developer for, at the time, about 14 years, and I've been doing it for 17 years. And I was like, I've done software, like I know Arduino, how hard can it be to build a commercial product? Yeah. Every time someone's like, I'm in software, I want to do a hardware project. What can you advise me about? I'm like, don't do it. Go home, start a family, whatever. So anyway, so we did a lot of meeting with them. We talked to them a lot. Man, I hate the flowers. We talked to so many girls, and they made the decision every step of the way. We sent them designs. We did a lot of sketches. We sent them dozens and dozens of different things, pinwheels, stars, all these things. Asked them to vote. The flower won by a landslide. So we made a flower bracelet because that's what they wanted. We did a lot of prototyping before ending up with our own board. That big old guy on bottom was our works like prototype. And the tiny, tiny little one was our looks like prototype. We ended up with something close to in the middle. Here's an evolution of our boards as they went. One thing that it's really surprising how small these components are. Was really a lot what I learned. Our microprocessor is 4 millimeters by 4 millimeters, and I always say I could eat it and I'd have no idea. I don't go around eating microprocessors, so or I try not to. So the thing that was important to us as we were building was an active online community where girls can code things and share code with each other, like a baby stack overflow, if you will. The ability to have your bracelet light up when you're near your friends and send secret messages to them when they're nearby. So that was the really exciting part to them. The idea was to build something that's fun first. So focus on the fun and make it open source so that if they want to, they can just have fun, but there's that ability to learn to code as well. And yeah, the idea is to make it more fun with code. So inside these guys, there's a bunch of plastic and a bunch of nylon and OpenSourceHardware inside. We made the caps interchangeable so we can design other ones in the future. We have one that has an awesome robot on it on our site that people have been 3D printing and putting on their bots. Under the hood, we have got a button, RGB LEDs, a USB micro. We're using the Nordic chip, the NRF51. And the reason why we chose that guy is because JoulBots talk to each other using Bluetooth. So that's how they find other JoulBots. So constantly polling the room, and they're saying, are any of my friends nearby? Are any of my friends nearby? And so when the two devices find each other, that's when they react and they light up, and that's how they send the messages to each other. So the NRF51 allows you to have 8 simultaneous central and peripheral relationships with devices that are near you, which allows us to do that. There's also an app that you can use to track your friends. We used Cordova and Ionic to build it because there's some great BLE libraries in there. And right now it's only for iPhone. All of our stuff is on GitHub, GitHub/robots. You can see all our boards. You can see all our code. That was an important part of our process. But for next, I need a volunteer from the audience. Well, are you volunteering? Okay. Yeah. That's a really good question. And the answer is there's just some troubleshooting things we need to do in order to make it Android as well. Yeah. But I do need a volunteer. Do you want to be my volunteer? Yeah, come on up. Hi, I'm Sara.
Hey, I'm Matt.
And you're Matt from MakerNet. Awesome. Okay, well, first I have to ask if you want to be my friend.
Would you be my friend?
Yes, okay.
Oh my God.
Okay, good. That's going to be a little tight. It's made for young girls.
Hey, no judge.
Okay.
I feel like a younger.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Okay, so to be friends, you and I are going to hold down the center button for 3 seconds.
Okay.
So 1 locomotive, 2 locomotive, 3 locomotive. And then let go.
Oh, we're glowing.
I think yours is off, so just try it again. 1. Oh, now we just turned it off. Sorry.
Oh, oopsie. Try again.
1 locomotive, 2 locomotive, 3 locomotive. Mind if I do
Yeah,
it?
you do it. I have big fat man fingers.
Okay, great. Okay, so now they're blinking, and now we get to choose our friendship color. So once it sees you see a color you like, let me know.
Now.
Okay, great. Okay, so we get blue, and so this guy is like, all right, we're going to be blue friends. I'm sending the message to this guy, and it's like letting him know we're going to be blue. And then this guy is going to be like, all right, I guess
Yay,
we're
I'm blue.
friends.
Rockin'.
Awesome. And now, you can go sit down. So now, whenever we're together, our bracelets will be blue.
Okay.
Your bracelets will start being blue any second.
Any moment now.
Any second now.
There it is. I'm blue.
Okay, great. And if you go sit down, I'll send you a message. Yeah, great, awesome. Thanks for being an awesome volunteer. So that's how they work, and to code them, you plug them into your machine using a micro USB, and you can use the Arduino IDE. We used a lot of the work of Red Bear Labs, which are awesome people to help work with the Nordic chip and allow us to program the device using C++. And so normal programming for firmware is not easy, especially when you're 8. And so we had to think a lot about how we would make it so kids could code these things and they would be fun to code and make it a little easier. So we abstracted things out a little bit and opened up some of the functionality to them using a library that they can use themselves. So the ability to turn lights on and set light colors, the way you work with the button on the device, the way you send messages to each other. We opened this all up to them by building an API that made sense to them. We also added hard-coded some colors that they could use. One of the girls in the forums, their favorite thing is to come up with new colors by combining the new lights and then asking us to add it to the firmware. So that's been pretty fun. And so as a result, oh, this is so small, you can't see this at all. But I can just tell you what this is. So as a result, the code looks like something like LED, like instantiating the LED class by making a variable called LED, and then you can say like LED turn on all, and then you pass it the variable, which is a color, like green. So it'll say LED turn on all green, or we also pre-baked in some animations for them so they can make fun animations, so rainbow animations and flashing animations and different things like that are some things that they worked on. You can see the animations. So another thing they like to do is come up with new animations. Some things they created, we have really nerdy kids that come up with things like Pomodoro timers, which is crazy. We have fun kids that make fun games like Simon-type games. We're working on, right now in the app, our biggest priority is to give them access to the internet so they can program them to like tell them if they have a new Instagram message or like if it's going to start raining or stuff like that. So that's kind of what's our product development timeline. So I'm running short on time. Wait. But if you had told me 5 years ago that we'd have so many 8-year-olds, if I'd be sitting in the room talking to 8, 9, 10-year-olds and having them so stoked about coding C++, I would have told you you were nuts. But it is something to behold when you are in a room full of kids that never would have looked for this on their own, but now have found it because it involves something that they really enjoy, which is their friendship. So we've learned we have a 44% conversion rate from kids that just play with the device to kids that are coding, which we were expecting 10%, and we wanted to work our way up from there, so we were really stoked about 40%. Thanks. We've shipped 10,000 units to 33 countries so far, and have had hundreds of students come to in-person events, which are super fun. We always have things like face painting and hair dyeing and like all kinds of fun stuff like that. Thank you everyone for having me here, and I hope you get to check out Jewelbox. I can stick around for some questions. Yeah. Yeah.
How did you decide not to like go the easy route and do some sort of MIT scratch or
A good drag and drop. Yeah. So that's because of my stubbornness and really like I just think kids are smart and coding isn't that hard and kids are really smart, and so there have been a lot of requests from parents for that kind of thing, so we'll probably do that at some point. But I've been just not surprised, but just really stoked to see like kids can figure it out. Like I was coding C++ when I was 11, and I'm just normal. It's just you have to be into it. Yeah. Thanks. Anyone else? Right now, they're on the website. They're $49 for one, I think $89 for two, and we do educator discounts. So if you're an educator, get a discount. Cool. Well, thanks everyone so much for having me. This is awesome. I'm so excited to see everyone's projects and learn.
Thank you so much. So two things. First, we're going to bring Drew up to give you a 5-minute overview of these badges, because he is the man behind the badges. He knows all about these badges. And so I think it's a good opportunity to give a little bit of background to understand what it is we're all carrying around our necks today. So Drew, come on up. And then if you are a speaker before lunch, please come find me in the back outside. Thank you very much.
Hi. So 5 years ago, we were here at MIT, and we had an electronic conference badge. So I'm Drew. I'm from Osh Park, and we thought for this year it'd be fun to have electronic conference badge again this year. So we have a badge with a ESP32 microcontroller, which has Wi-Fi, and then a e-paper display. So one of the things if you look on the back is a QR code, and that will take you to our documentation website. This badge really came together on Hackadata.io, created a project page on there back in the spring when we talked to OSHWA about doing a badge for the summit, and a bunch of people jumped in and have helped out a lot. Main designer of the badge was Alex Canelo. I don't know if he's here yet or not. He's from Worcester, so he's nearby. Michael Welling helped do reviews of it, and a bunch of other people helped out as well. And I want to also really thank Artisans Asylum for giving us space to get all these badges together over the last couple of days. So for the ones, I had about 150 names, so I programmed some of them in with names, so some of your badges will already have the names in them. For those of you that don't, what we can do is when you put the batteries in, there's this button with the paintbrushes here, and that'll go into a menu mode. And one is change name is the first menu item. I should mention the firmware is actually running MicroPython, and I can explain a little bit more about it later if you come up to me. But the fun thing is actually it's very dynamic, and we can load new programs onto it. So if you go into check name, then the next thing it will then display a SSID that you can connect to. So the badge goes into AP mode, you can connect to it, and it'll give you a URL, and you go to the URL, and then you can change the name. So it'll ask you for first name, last name, then you set the name, and then you'll have your name displayed on the badge. One of the things I noticed on my Android phone is I had to go into airplane mode to keep it from trying to go to the internet through LTE when I try and go to that IP address, because it's an internal IP address. If you have problems, just go into airplane mode and then turn on Wi-Fi again, and then try and connect to the AP. But I'll be at the table all day by the entryway there if you have issues. The other thing too, you might notice in the menu is one of the options is FTP server. What you can do with that is you can write your own MicroPython programs, and they'll be listed once you FTP them over to the badge. So you can write your own programs and run them on your badge. So that's really fun. We do also have an accelerometer on there, which it doesn't do anything by default, but you could write your own MicroPython program to access the accelerometer and do some interesting things with it. A lot of the firmware was kind of developed at the last minute, so if you have an interest in helping out, you can jump onto the Hackaday.io project page, and we have a chat room on there that we've all been collaborating on. But kind of the main thing to look at is the QR code and the URL listed there. We'll point you to the different GitHub repos and different documentation. And the other thing that's nice is we actually did register it as certified open source hardware, so it's US 00133. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions, and definitely want to thank also Screening Circuits for assembling it so we didn't have to spend months soldering this with like stencils and in a toaster oven. So it's very wonderful that Screening Circuits sponsored the assembly. So hopefully you'll have fun with it, play around with it. Oh, the other thing that's in the bag, you all should have gotten a bag with batteries, and there's 2 PCBs in it. One is a little proto board. So this is actually the header from a lot of DEF CON badges. So it gives you power and ground and then data for doing I2C. So with this, you could solder up your own circuit and then connect it to your badge. And then also in the bag is the header. So you'd want to solder the socket onto the badge, and then the headers would be soldered onto the add-ons, and then you can connect them. But the really fun one is we thought, oh, there should be some sort of learn to solder type thing because the badges are assembled. So this is the learn to solder in the shape of the Open Source Hardware Association's logo. So Andy Soa from a hackerspace in Chicago, Pumping Station 1, designed this in KiCad, and I think it came out quite nice. So when you solder this together, it's just a resistor and a color changing LED and the header, and you connect it to your badge, you will then have a nice little glowing LED that changes colors. So kind of a fun little add-on there. Then hopefully you'll come up with some other interesting add-ons. So yeah, if you have any questions, come by the table up front and we'll help you out. Look forward also to seeing what sort of hacks and mods you all might do. So thank you.
I'm very excited for our next speaker. I did a lot of work at the Federal Communications Commission in a prior life. And one of the things that everyone would whisper every once in a while is everything would be different if we had software-defined radio. And so I'm excited that there's a presentation about software-defined radio to explain how everything will be different now that we have it.
Thanks so much. Okay, this is working great. So thanks very much. My name is Robin Getz. I'm with Analog Devices. I'm an engineer there. For those people who are, is anybody not familiar with Analog Devices? A couple people? Software people. Sorry. So Analog Devices is a semiconductor company. We've been around since 1965. We're actually located just north of the Boston area. That's our largest engineering facility in Wilmington. We have about 15,000 employees and 125,000 different customers, and we make plenty of different chips. And we also do a lot of open source hardware ourselves, including a SDR thing that I'll talk about. And you know, a lot of the reasons that we do open source hardware is because Our customers, which are also everybody in this room, as well as large consumer companies and aerospace defense companies and everybody else, they don't immediately go to a schematic. They start playing with things. They want to see how it works. They want to prototype. They want to tinker. And when they do that, they want to do it on Arduino. They want to do it on a Raspberry Pi. They want to do it on BeagleBoard. So we actually make platforms like that that connect into that kind of ecosystem. And go all the way up the stack. So we actually work with GNU Radio and develop GNU Radio pieces and do a lot of Linux kernel device drivers and a lot of other things as well, including LT-Spice, which is an analog circuit simulator. We also work with a lot of education pieces, so a lot of outreach. We have an active learning program which does both circuits pieces with parts kits, like here, where students can go buy things and get R's and C's and op amps and power and various different things, as well as we are a big supporter of FIRST, and then have a software-defined radio, which is this Pluto device. So for those people who are unfamiliar with software-defined radio, this is how Wikipedia defines it. And almost everything that is a radio today is somewhat software-defined. So your cell phone is actually, there's large portions of the cellular stack that run all in software. There's large portions of the cellular stack that run in hardware, both in terms of acceleration engines and those kinds of things. But then there are a lot of other things like walkie-talkies or man-pack radios or UAVs or a variety of different things actually are all software-defined. So this little piece, let me just, pointer options, no, laser pointer. This piece right here is actually going into locomotive engines. And what that's for is actually to monitor the train engineer so that you can tell when he's on his cell phone or not. Because most of the accidents in the US are now actually, especially on trains, because you don't have to steer a train, are basically caused by operator distraction. And so they're actually putting sophisticated electronics, sophisticated SDRs just to monitor the train engineer's cell phone. And then the liability falls off the train company and goes on to that driver or the train engineer, which is the train engineers know so they don't pick up their cell phone. So one of the newer learning kits from ADI is this Pluto device. This is in my hand right here. So it is open source hardware, which would include the schematics and the Gerbers. Unfortunately, we don't do things in KiCad, but the schematics are open source in Allegro. Firmware is open source, which would include the FPGA, HDL, all the software that goes inside the device. The host software is mostly open source, and I say mostly because we interface with MATLAB, and MATLAB's not open source, but the different pieces that we've made are actually open and all up on GitHub. So what this really does is it captures IQ samples from the antennas and does either local processing on the unit, because it does actually run Linux, or transmits that to the PC, and you can do processing there. And it does run Linux inside the device, so it's about a single core ARM. It's about the same processing performance as a Raspberry Pi Zero. So for those people familiar, you can run Dump 1090, which is a ADS-B application. So every airplane that flies has to transmit the tail feathers, their latitude, longitude, altitude, and their velocity and vector in terms of where they're flying. And by 2020, every single drone will have to do that as well. And you can basically track those things with this device and run all the software to decode it actually on the device itself. So it's very cross-platform, Windows, Linux, Mac, and it uses a stack inside the Linux kernel called IIO, which is the Industrial Input-Output Framework, to actually expose this device locally on the system, as well as remote over USB or Ethernet or a variety of different connectivity pieces. So you can do processing remote, processing local. When you plug this into your PC over USB, it shows up as a native IO device, as serial, as Ethernet, as mass storage, and DFU. So native I/O over USB is to get the IQ data across, the radio data to your laptop or your desktop. A serial is so that you can actually log into the device. We are running a a Linux machine on here, so you can log in just like console, log in as root, and the password is analog. Ethernet is a great way to SSH and SCP over files back and forth to test things out. Mass storage, you plug this in, it shows up as hard drive on your laptop, and that's how actually we upgrade the firmware. You can take the firmware image and just drop it onto the mass storage device. That's where all of our documentation exists. That's where all of our license files exist, is on the mass storage device itself. So it's super easy to use. And this is all built from the standard Linux gadget USB drivers. And then if you load a image up on here that doesn't boot for some reason, because we want to make it hackable and extensible, if the Linux image doesn't boot, it'll boot into a recovery mode called DFU, which is a separate USB device class which basically turns this into a firmware programmer. And then you get to reprogram the flash that's on here. And that's a standard feature in U-boot, the second stage bootloader that we use. So this does run embedded Linux. We can see up on the screen. Oh, we can see up on the screen it actually booting Linux. Or not. Anyway, it does run Linux. And it takes about 2 seconds to boot. There's, oops, no, I just got all confused, sorry. It is cross-platform. Maybe. It runs the 4.14 LTS kernel, so it's actually a fairly recent kernel. It's all build root and BusyBox. It has about a 2-second boot time, 32 meg of serial flash on here, and 512 meg of DDR. There is a small button on here that we typically use to, if you push the button and power it on, then it comes up in a programming mode if you want to recover something. People repurpose that button. They'll power this from a battery that is normally used to charge your phone. And then they'll walk around with a USB thumb drive hanging off the end. And every time they want to record an RF signal, they can basically covertly push the button and it'll record a second of information and store it on the thumb drive. And it's a great way to do kind of covert wireless surveys so you don't have to drive around in your boat, you know, a mile offshore. So it is open source firmware. All the firmware is up on GitHub, and that would include like the HDL, the Linux kernel, all of user space, BusyBox, the Xilinx first stage bootloader. It's built up as a multi-function or a multi-repository GitHub. So when you say git checkout, it'll clone all the different pieces for you, and you type make, it'll actually build everything for you in one step, assuming you have the Xilinx tools installed correctly. This does actually build with Webpack, which is not open, but is zero cost. And it basically will give you these files that you can just basically throw on the mass storage device and then upgrade. It is cross-platform, so this is it running on Windows. Let me see if I turn this. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. There we go. Now it's working. Okay, so it actually boots up and you can SSH into it with PuTTY. So every time the device boots, it actually generates a different SSH key from Dropbear, which then provides a warning, and you can cat proc CPU info and see what kind of machine you're on. You know, it has a single core ARM. So there's basically a single, for those people who are aware, it's a single core Zinc that's inside here, 7010. And we can actually use the PuTTY to get a serial to the same device, and we can just go into COM on this machine, COM 5, 45, and log in as root and analog and kind of go from there. It can be used, like I said before, into a host, so that could be Linux, Windows, Mac, your embedded Linux target like a Raspberry Pi or BeagleBoard, thumb drives because it supports on the go, USB LAN, USB Wi-Fi. So those will plug right into here, and we support all the common dongles that are actually supported with Raspberry Pi in the default image. One of the things we don't support I'm building up is actually supporting USB audio, so you can actually like decode FM or listen to FM radio, do these kinds of things right on the device. We support GNU Radio, so this is actually an application called Phosphor, where it basically shows a waterfall, and what that waterfall is just the amplitude of that signal at that instant in time, and then that instant in time falls down the screen, and you can kind of recreate whatever you want depending on what you're broadcasting. When I was doing this, I was broadcasting with a SMA cable, not with antennas, because this has a tendency to take down Wi-Fi. SDR Angel is another great open source application. It's Windows, it's Linux, it's all based on Qt and OpenGL, and it has a lot of decoders built into it. It's great for starting out. For those people who are more interested in MATLAB, you can do that. There's books that are also available. With the books, the one book that I was involved in writing is actually available for free, featured on Hackaday. One of my favorite quotes is like, if you don't like math, this book may not be for you, because it is a digital communications book. The documentations are all online, but like every open source hardware project, everybody needs more documentation, so if you're interested in helping, let it know. All the support model is online. Everything is up on GitHub or the Analog Devices Wiki. Support is on our Engineer Zone forums. People have taken this design, so a company in Chicago named Epic, they've actually turned it into a commercial product. And so this is actually very, very close schematically to the Pluto, with the addition of some RF pieces that make it a little bit more rugged and industrial. And then they can actually take this and use our HDL, use our software, and not have to create everything themselves. So people are absolutely leveraging open source, leveraging open hardware, these kinds of things in their commercial design. The piece that I'd like to talk about too is like test, which is typically the missing part of open source hardware. So we actually developed a test jig for the Pluto device, which was fairly large quad site tester. So you put 4 PCBs in it, you close the top of it. When you close the top of it, these bed of the PCBs would be held in place. The bed of nails would basically lift up, these pogo pins, and then underneath was 4 Raspberry Pis, all running OpenOCD, so that we could program JTAG and test with the device and test the USBs and a variety of these kinds of pieces. It was all networked so that it could communicate back to GitHub and post test results and send us emails, and we could remote into it and debug it when it was on the factory floor. At least that was our perception before we actually shipped it to China. So one of the issues that we had with this was actually the bushings that we put in that big piece of plastic were put in with a 3-ton press, but during the repeated up-downs in the factory, the bushing actually came out and started binding, which basically made that white thing at the bottom not come up flat, and then the pogo pin on one side would never come up to the devices. And, so we learned a lot. We actually went to China, saw how things were working. What we had was a unit that provided very nice, simple instructions. It was a red light, green light test. So red light boards are bad, green boards were good, and that was awesome. But it didn't provide any other feedback than that. So when somebody needed to take a bad board and find out what was wrong with it, there was no real way for them to do that. What we found out was that the systems that we built, whereas we could buy all the component pieces in Europe and buy all the component pieces in the US, the component pieces were actually harder to find in China. So for the next test fixture we built, we actually sourced it all from China. We actually, in terms of lessons learned when you go to China, when you have all these boards sitting around, there's lots of different things. One of the things we didn't think about was actually using conformal coating, or basically covering our test jigs with plastic, because the factories are super hot and super humid, and we actually had issues with the PCBs because they weren't cleaned as thoroughly as they should, actually corroding and sticking on or sticking off, that kind of an idea. Ensuring that the test jigs are there and we have backups. So I think test is actually a super important thing that many people doing open source hardware don't necessarily think about, because it's fun to make one. It's a different thing when you're trying to make 1,000 a month or 5,000 a month. And it's super important to be able to do that. And one of the things that we learned too is reusing things between products is also super good. When you do go to China, especially Shenzhen and different pieces of Shenzhen, it's always good to have somebody who can speak native the language. And then from a software standpoint, one of the things we learned as well was when you're out on the factory floor doesn't usually have Ethernet on it or available Wi-Fi or these kinds of things that you would take for granted here that's just not possible there. So we built up a system that's basically a store and forward where all the test results would store on an SD card and kind of go from there. And this is kind of what the test jigs look now. So they're all built in China with local parts. Seed Studios actually facilitated this. They're actually local to Shenzhen. One of the things that we saw in the test flow before was our test jig in the past would actually print a sticker out. It would go on the back of the box to tell you the serial number and the MAC address and these kinds of things. But that's not the way they actually built them. They would build and test 5,000, and then they had a second station somewhere else. They would actually like assemble them in the plastic boxes, and there was no way to keep the stickers and the actual PCBs with the MAC addresses on them actually like synchronized. So we have actually made a separate station to print out the stickers. Just with, I think it's just a Raspberry Pi running G-label. And we've done this for other test jigs, so some more sophisticated things like our analog kits, which are oscilloscope function generator, which need to be like tuned. They're actually connected up to like netbooks. And then we have like FIDI parts, which are doing like JTAG and SPI and GPIOs and those kinds of things to test everything. And when it comes to tuning capacitors with screwdrivers and those kinds of things, that's all actually done from the GUI on the laptop, and it makes it much easier. So if you do have any questions about the kits or things, I'll definitely be around the rest of the day, and feel free to grab me. So thanks very much.
That was not good. Just gave up the ghost. Your lights. There we go. I don't know why I decided to turn it off. Okay. Cool. How does this work? Again. Please work.
Yeah.
Hey, there we go.
Amazing.
Okay. Good. Good. Hello. Let's see. Okay. Sorry, it's hard to hear myself from up here. Hi, my name is Raskob. I teach computational art, computational design, and I do strange things like live coding. I played algorithms. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of an algorithm. Anybody? One of you, two of you, yes. Okay. If you've not, check it out. It's fun. Anyway, what I'm going to talk about is a system called Live Printer. The idea is it's supposed to be an open source cybernetic 3D printing system. What does that mean? So what I really wanted to do is deconstruct 3D printing. So I'm going to be really critical of 3D printing and say that there's some huge difficulties with it. I really like it, and it's got amazing potential. And on the high end is something very different from the low end. What I'm really talking about is low-end desktop 3D printing that most of us have seen with Ultimakers and MakerBots and whatnot. So I just want to make that distinction. I want to really deconstruct that process. I want to rebuild it and then start to re-evolve it around people and makers, and not necessarily as an offshoot of an industrial manufacturing process. And I want to make it live. And when I say live, I mean live as in the sense of like just directly controlling these things, cutting out kind of middleman, if you would. And there's some little shapes that I've made live with this system. So to kind of go back a bit, the reason I got here is because I was trying to make data sculptures. And I thought it'd be really interesting to just create these kind of computational sculptures and then 3D print them out. And then, something that's not, something you couldn't sculpt by hand. So, creating a virtual object and then turning it directly with some code into a physical object. I kind of thought the system would be something like this, where I start out with a design concept, and then I just stick it in some modeling software, which then you put in some software that develops toolpaths, and then you stick it in a printer and it's done. Right? That's kind of the workflow I thought it was going to be. So I made these shapes. I developed some computational software that took sound and then wrapped it into these nice spirals, and I made sure it looked kind of pretty. And I got some really nice results out of it. These things did work. And again, I'm not trashing 3D printing. I think you can make amazing shapes like this that I definitely could not do by hand, because of the precision of how it's done. But the real system was something more like this. Okay, and there were some extra steps in there, like all these extra software packages I had to use to clean up and fix models that I never thought I'd have to do. And there's a lot of feedback in the system where you start out with an idea and then you put it in some fixing software and you realize that you've got holes in your meshes and it was never going to work anyway, so you have to go rethink your design. And the constant feeding back of it took tons and tons of time. And this took me, I thought it was going to be like a month. It took me probably 2 years of work in the end to get some interesting stuff out of it. And at the end of that even is you get a lot of plastic waste because you've gone through tons of trials, you've wasted tons of electricity, you've got buckets of plastic, you've got many frustrated lost working hours. So it was a very frustrating experience. So I started writing a paper on this and doing some real experiments. And this is sort of an unpublished paper, hopefully to be published soon, where I actually looked at how can I print different classes of shapes and what are some interesting things that the geometry might show us about how we can then print shapes in new ways. And even got so far as to get out infrared cameras and start to look at cooling patterns on this, because I was kind of inspired by past papers in 3D printing. But really, if you get back to the heart of it, so I'm a teacher, I'm an educator, and what I'm really looking at a lot of times is experiential learning and how that feeds back into my work. So I'm taking John Dewey's experiential learning cycle, and I'm very much in that kind of abductive phase of trying to intuitively create objects and then learn from the creation of these objects. And the problem with 3D printing is that this phase takes way too long. If I'm in a wood shop, I can cut some wood, I can instantly see what the problem is. And, I may be a bit crap at it for a while, but I know where I'm going to go with it, and I can learn and I can get better. Whereas with 3D printing, I just felt like, going back to the cycle again, you've got so many different places things can go wrong, and they're all independent. Is the material printing at the right temperature? Is the thing going at the right speed? Was your geometry okay? There's just a ton of things that you can't really control for when you're learning. So I want to then reinvent this into a new system, okay? And I think what the heart of this problem with 3D printing is that there's two modes of thinking. Okay, there's what we have today versus the future. And with today, what we're making is planned. So we start out with a workflow where we create something, we model it, we want to make something then exactly based on that, like an exact copy in our 3D printer. Right? So sort of inductive thinking. We have a hypothesis. We have an idea of what we want to make. It's deliberate, right? It's representative. We're trying to make an object that's a representation of something. It's pre-planned, and it's sort of step by step, right? And the problem with that is that if there's an error, then you have to chuck the thing out, right? It's like do or die. But there's other ways of making, and you could argue this a bit more like of a cybernetic or performative way of making, which is to build up an object based on consecutive actions, which again is sort of the classic way of making objects, where you start out in a design and you're working with a material and you're letting the material kind of lead you through a process. Okay, so you're kind of working on the intuition of making. You're exploring what the material can do and the process and the form can do. You're improvising. Okay, in the first system, you can't improvise. You've already planned the thing out, and you have to go through the whole process. But here, you can kind of change steps. And it's a bit generative. This is, arguably what generative systems are like. You set up some rules, and then you play out the system, and then you see what happens with it. It's also a bit functional. Okay, So again, errors are actually an interesting part of this process. They're expected, and they're something that you want because you can then integrate that into the final design, like your happy accidents. So to kind of illustrate that, I know it's kind of a big concept, and it's actually, what they say about theories is that every theory is wrong, but some are useful. Okay, so that's how I'm thinking about that as an overarching theory. But if you look at just making a circle, right? The green circle on the left, I think of as like the pre-planned circle, right? You know the equation of a circle, you generate a set of points at the beginning, and then you can connect them with lines. On the right is a more performative circle, where you start out at a point, that tiny white dot all the way to the right. You start out at a point, and you just move in a distance, and then turn, and move in a distance, and turn, and you keep repeating. And if there's any errors, then maybe your circle's off by a little bit, but it could still be interesting. Okay, it can recover from those mistakes. Whereas in the kind of first one, if you were off, then your shape is mush from the beginning. So, how does liveness come into this, right? Well, liveness is, in a sense of 3D printing, again, this direct control of 3D printing. And liveness to me, as someone who performs with code, is the sense that you can take, you can actually use control structures. Okay, so I know 3D printing right now, you have systems where you can send G-code and you can sort of manipulate, you can send commands basically to a 3D printer, but that's not the same as code. As anyone knows with code is rich and it has algorithms and variables and functional structures and repetition, and that's something that we don't have with 3D printing right now on an immediate level. And user need. So, going back to what Eric said at the beginning, I've seen a lot of use cases of people innovating with their 3D printers and making machines. I've seen some amazing hacks of machines where people are using like Microsoft Excel to like generate points to feed to their 3D printer. So like, it's already happened. I don't want to say I've invented this, but I think, I'm helping to birth this system that actually can help people. And then it kind of creates this interesting blend of like performance and manufacturing, which has some interesting precedents with like Ballet and GM, if anyone knows about that weird side story, which I can't get to now, unfortunately. But I thought it'd be interesting, being, again, someone who performs with code, what if you perform with manufacturing and code? Like, what does that even look like? So again, a lot of stuff is already around. I don't want to say that what I'm doing is radically different, but I think the framing of it's radically different. Because RepRap has web control. You have things like CNC.js, where you can, again, send G-code and command line stuff. You have Octoprint, and you have G-code and CNC macros already. And, some software has this sort of sense of liveness in it. But 3D printing doesn't. And I think that's really interesting that it has that kind of big blind sight right now. So for a system, what that means is lightweight control. So I think, you want to have a system where you can send commands and, not have a really heavy syntax, make things be very responsive, so that whatever you type in, you can have intuition and exploration in the moment and not have to wait for things to render. You have immediacy. You need a compact language that people can understand and can use. And you need to really get printing quickly, which, as anyone who's done 3D printing knows, is not an easy thing, because this is a physical thing, right? Like, you got to heat it up, you got to put the filament in. The other day I was actually trying to do performance with this, and then the smoke alarm went off, and I thought it was the printer, so I shut it down, and I jammed the printing head because it cooled down too fast. And, when you're in the moment, that's, it's hard to recover from that. It takes time. Okay? So hopefully, the system makes things easier. And you could see some experiments just trying to do like a kind of rectangular fill. I think you can experiment with things you couldn't normally experiment with in the moment. And the system itself that I've developed is fairly complex. That diagram's on the website, so it's got too much information for now. But the gist I want to get out of it is that it's a very portable system where you have a web browser which can run on any computer, and you have basically a Python backend, which started out as a hacked version of some open source software that controls Ultimakers and is now more of its own thing. So it's sort of a two-tier system where you're having live coding in a browser, and then it's going to basically just compile down to G-code for printer. Okay, that's the gist of it. Kind of a simple idea. There's a lot of housekeeping involved in that. That's not so fun and simple. The way it works is, again, in two modes. So I've got this idea of representational and performative modes in it. So you can put things in coordinate by coordinate if you kind of know what you're doing or you want to generate things more exactly. And there's just simple commands like moving and extruding and fill. Okay, it's very simple stuff. Or you can work relatively, where you have commands, and this really goes back to days of turtle graphics, right? Where you're like move, extrude, turn, all that kind of stuff, right? I mean, why mess with a classic? So what that looks like on the bottom, right now this is in JavaScript, but it can also be in Python. There's a compiler for that as well. And hopefully it has its own language soon. But right now it looks like lp.distance and then 100 millimeters, dot thickness, and then you set that in millimeters, dot the angle you want to move at, dot speed, dot go. So that might be a typical command line, and you can set and unset those as it goes. And again, to kind of lay out, a bit of theory of where I'm kind of staking my ground, I'm calling this live computational sculpting. And I think it's an interesting blend of this idea of live coding performance, this idea of cybernetics as a science of control, computer-controlled manufacturing, which was kind of developed more of an industrial level, and then design research, which I don't know if many of you really are familiar with that term, but it's sort of the idea that, a lot of designers innovate in practice. So, you're not building things for other people, but you're building things as a designer for yourself in collaboration with others. So it's somewhere in there. And again, this diagram's on the website. It takes a bit of theory, I think, and understanding to get to the heart of. But the idea of live computational sculpting, I think, has some merit. So to wrap up, I think the future of this now, what I'd like is, some participation, because it'd be really great to get more people on board. I'd like to look at materials testing, because there really doesn't exist a system for actually testing materials in 3D printing. And I found out it's pretty much a fiction as to like what stuff prints at. Like 210 degrees Celsius for like some materials, whatever. I mean, like maybe 190, maybe 195, maybe at some angle, maybe not. There's no way to test that right now. So, and not an easy way. I'd like to redevelop toolpaths that work and maybe computational shapes. Look at the workflow of plastics for physics, the workflow of physics for plastics, extrusion, retraction, dripping, there's lots of interesting side effects that I've discovered with this. Look at live generative shapes, like playing Game of Life on a 3D printer live. Education, it's really good for it, understanding 3D printing. And hopefully then the end is re-evolving the hardware of 3D printing and thinking about alternate systems for it, so we can build them with this kind of human practitioner in mind. Maybe it's more of a piece of collaborative performance than it's like an offshoot of industrial manufacturing. And then actually performing with it, which I'm hoping to do at a live coding conference where we make music with it, because they sound fun too. So that's it. There's the URL for GitHub, and thank you very much. Oh, yeah, a question or two. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the question was about designing in virtual reality. Yeah, actually, I didn't really mention that, but I think augmented reality could be amazing for this. Maybe virtual reality as well, but I mean, I would love to see a 3D printer that had some sort of live overlay, so you could sort of trace out paths in the shape. I mean, what I tried to avoid with this, though, is doing too much pre-virtualization, because I really wanted people to actually focus on the printer in front of them, and kind of get that intuition with it. So I'm not so sure about full VR, but I mean, definitely AR would be really fascinating with 3D printing. Yeah. Do I have time for one more, do you think? Yeah, one more question, or? Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And I've made many mistakes live. I think right now the system is really at like a proof of concept phase. I mean, I've got it working right now and I've made stuff with it, but I think that's a really interesting question. I think the tools need to evolve a bit to fit that method of working. I don't think they're there yet, but I think some of the 3D printing systems that maybe have like a bigger blob or like robot arms, can really support that kind of real liveness and sculpting. I mean, I think then you call it, computational sculpting rather than 3D printing in a way to kind of differentiate. But yeah, I mean, the question is, what do you make out of that? I mean, I don't know. I mean, data sculpture is one thing. I've been talking to people about doing live physicalizations of like pollution data in cities, which is kind of an interesting thing to build up. You know, I think there's some things, but you know, I'd love to get more use cases of interesting stuff to do with it. Yeah.
How does the speed of a 3D printer affect what you're trying to do? You have to sit around for 30 hours and wait for
Yeah, they're pretty slow actually. Yeah. When I did a workshop just this past weekend, and I wound up making lots of bracelets for kids because it was quite fast, and I had to explain it to 5-year-olds, which is always quite difficult. It's easy to just make a generative shape and give it to them. I think what's interesting is textiles. I've been working in a department that has lots of people printing on textiles and adding tension and shape to them. And I think for that, there's a lot of really immediate applications because that's very quick. For actually building up big shapes, yeah, again, I think we need to think about what that workflow is. And it's like, do you do code in shapes and start them and then come back again? Yeah, there's a lot of questions around that. I don't have an easy answer to that yet, I think. That's something to explore. Yeah. Okay. Good?
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Adam, get you up here. What's your connection of this?
This thing that you're holding. Actually, I have a Type-C. I brought them with me too.
Up to you.
Ta-da.
Player's choice.
Cool.
All right.
Thank you, man. All right, hello. How's it going? Happy to be here. By the way, my name is Adam. We contributed this beautiful stock. So, thank you very much. We've heard there's a huge shortage with socks with the open source community. They're completely Creative Commons, rip them off. They're on Alibaba. It's awesome. Made in China. Thank you. Thank you. Perfect. There you go. So my name is Adam. I'm from Hackster. And I was really thinking, I didn't know what to talk about, and Drew actually helped me with some really fancy technical sort of presentation, but I completely removed it because I have zero credibility to present to you guys about anything that truly relates to open source hardware. So I figured I'll talk about something that I really know and something that's important for everybody. It's really how to build a community, and in particular an open source community, which is even a little different. There's a bit of a joke here without being a total sellout. We actually sold Hackster to Avnet, but it's been 2 years. They didn't touch us. They kept us as a separate division, and we kept our principles and our code of ethics to date without touching the community. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So hopefully you find this useful. It'll be a little bit of a stand-up comedy here too, but we'll see how it goes. So Hackster is a really fun community. There's a lot of awesome communities in the world. Shout out to our friends at Hackaday and Instructables and a lot of others, of course GitHub, and so many amazing communities in Stack Overflow, Sara. Hackster is it's a really pretty sizable community now. It's over 600,000 members of hackers and developers and artists, etc. It's growing at 40,000 members a month. We don't know where they come from, but they show up. That's like a lot of people every month. We have 14,000 open source projects and more, over 200 platforms from 150 countries, and we're doing this for not too long, a little bit over 4 years, with a bunch of partners. I saw Nate is here, so we love SparkFun. I saw Jason. We love BeagleBone. Awesome. So with a lot of really cool partners, which are both open and closed, and we'll talk about this too. So for those of you who don't really know, maybe Hackster, we have everything, like lots of really cool projects, anything from like this Alzheimer assistance that combines, open source and closed source and web services, but the projects always have to be open no matter what. Your source code, schematics, bill of materials, everything has to be open and free and shareable. All the way up to hardcore, blockchain signaling system from a PhD in Zurich that has built this crazy array and, has published his project. And of course, we have to have some fun, so things like punch-activated ARM flamethrower by our friend Alan from Venice Beach. I mean, you can't go wrong with this kind of stuff. It's amazing. He did this for us. He got like 1 million page views on YouTube. It's pretty awesome. All right, so communities. You guys all know this guy, God. Communities are the lifeline of any product, code, sharing, services log, or even any cause you might have. So really building a community is something that is really important. And a lot of companies, actually also organizations, struggle with it. So I'm trying to, again, share everything we've learned and be very open about it. But building communities can be hard, and keeping them is even harder. As this guy didn't work out. Actually, he kind of did work out. It's still happening. I visited that ashram once. It was cool. But communities are difficult, can get really sticky. So what I'll share with you guys is how do we grow our community in an average of 150,000 members a year. Kept a core team. Actually, a bunch of them are here. Artie, Monica, Alex, hi. And really doubled every 12 months. And we are still doubling now every 12 months, which is kind of like phenomenal. So again, I'll share about everything. So here are my top 5. Simple, way too wordy. It's not going to be one of these Apple presentations. It's going to be way too wordy, and I have 15 minutes, so I'm going to go really fast. And I'm always open to, if anybody ever want to reach out to us and talk to us how we do different things and you need help building a community, we'll help. All right, so I'm going to go quick because I don't have much time. So really, you start communities, I think, with really a really strong set of principles of who you are, and particularly in open source, because this is an unforgiving audience and people and engineers and developers and makers. It's people with a higher vision and higher views of life. It's not just about commercializing. It's about learning, intellectualism, sharing, etc. So really think of yourself that you're building, when you build a community, a green, safe, wonderful park with birds, water fountains, and an amazing library that is open for everybody. That's really what you're building. And also another thing is when you build a community, you actually don't own the community. You don't own a community. So it's funny when Avnet bought us, we're like, you're not buying anything because we don't own these people. All their content is all open source, and they can go away tomorrow. So you don't really even own anything. So think about this, or when you start these things, or when you build a community, you actually don't own anything. And by the way, people come to community because of your content, and you don't even own any of the content. And you shouldn't own any of the content because it is open and it is open source. What else? So there's a variety of things about how you think about content and people that you don't own them. And if it's only a community and it's an open park and it's fun and it's friendly, it's the internet, people in communities are on the internet, there's always going to be this troll that show up. It's typically a guy. Sometimes he could be kind of sexist and weird and say weird comments to people. And we notice some of the trolls attack women on the site, and we don't even have enough women on the site. Get rid of trolls. And sometimes the trolls are the smartest people on the site too. It doesn't matter. You don't care what they do and what they contribute. Trolls are a bad thing for your communities. If you notice a troll, talk to the troll, and if the troll stays a troll, hit the delete button and never look back. Never break the law. Oh, okay. That's good. I hit the mark. Have good taste in everything that you do. You can actually take a stand, but don't be too political, but take a stand on what you believe in. Work hard building beautiful software. Everything we do now is online. Things should be easy for people. Don't make it hard. It doesn't have to be super designed, but make it easy for people to use. Here's another interesting thing. Don't be a beggar. Money is actually important. A lot of people that we meet, they're like, well, we don't want to make money. It's not about the money. Well, guess what? If you're not going to make money to just pay your employees really shitty salaries, what we did for our employees for years, they barely got paid, they would have left eventually, and we wouldn't even have a community. So figuring out a way to actually create some sort of a business model for your community is really actually critical. Never buy names, never sell names. Even with Avnet now, we never one time shared a database with the mothership. They never even asked for it because we told them, you do this once and you can say goodbye to this beautiful thing that we built because they won't trust you. So never do any of that. Your integrity is never for sale. And for example, like little things for us, we said, we just hate banner ads. We don't want banners on the site. Even though people told us, we'll give you money, put banners on the site. We're like, we just don't like banners. So decide for yourself, where are your principles and where do you stop? So we just don't serve banners on the site. And like I mentioned, if you sold your business, it happens. Most communities, the kind of starving entities that they end up aligning themselves with a larger company, Again, don't devalue what your principles, what you thought of initially, and sell that when you sell the community. And a lot of companies have just nice, decent human beings, and they trust you, and they let you run it this way. Be super agnostic, do good things in the world, and choose a focus. For us, for example, we chose that it's learning. Learning is the value, not anything else, or above everything else. Also, then the second thing, like, think about the team. What kind of people are you going to hire? Hire people that love what you do, love hardware, right? Not just anybody because they're good, people that really love hardware. Hire people that are burners from Burning Man, love Burning Mans from Burning Man. Burners, artists, nomads. I mean, our entire team was people we collected in hackathons, in different events. We just met them everywhere. They're not like professionals, and people have a vision and a voice. Take bet on first-timers, and then what we do is like, hey, look, we have red tape. And we take a lighter and burn the red tape, because you don't need red tape. Red tape is terrible. We already said we're never going to break the law. We're going to do things with good taste. I trust the judgment, so you can do anything. And again, if I point out to our team sitting here, a few people that came, we don't tell them what to do. So if it's a volunteer or employee, we tell them just innovate, do something good for the community, good for the world, and execute. There is no red tape. We're not going to tell you what to do. We need to manage you. You're out of here, because there's no managers there either. So for example, Alex Lowe, you guys know Alex? Yes, everybody knows that. She's like a celebrity, right? And she did it her own way. We didn't tell Alex what to do. Now she's on YouTube. She gets like hundreds of thousands of page views and video views every time she posts something. She was on a cover page this month of Hackspace, the Raspberry Pi magazine. I'm wearing her shirt. There's a t-shirt. Here's Alex. And she is a mother of an owl. And you can ask her about it. It's amazing. She gave birth to an owl. Monica Houston, she does all of our events, hackathons, goes on the road, meets people, meetups. She's the real world of the hackers of Beverly Hills. That's what she does. She's out there. In Artie Beavis, he's a social media guy. And I'll talk about social media. He gets more engagement than the Kardashians. It's true. So it's really important to have good people that really, really drive your message and your organization and what you do everywhere. This is really important. So let's say you have a community and you want to kind of make a name for yourself. 5 minutes. You gotta stand out. It's kind of like a marketing thing, but you need that too, right? So we started and we kind of missed, like, why are we even here? There's so many other communities that are doing great. Why do we even exist? And well, we want to exist. So what we did is, this was actually Monica's idea. She went, let's just go on the crazy roadshow, buy a DeLorean, hack it to death, and call it Hack the Future. So we actually did that. We went on eBay, we bought a DeLorean, and we just drove it everywhere, including to Sparks Fund's annual autonomous vehicle, last another word, competition? Yes, which was fun in Colorado. And we went to 12 cities in 12 months. We met thousands of users. We even made money from sponsors. We said, hey, Microsoft, want a sticker on the DeLorean? $70,000. Done. And they give it to us. So it was really, really fun because it was exciting. It was inspiring. We also talked about the story, DeLorean, beautiful story, stainless steel, but the inside is not so good. How can we take this machine, bring it to the future in a better way? Started with a Windows app. We saw that. It happened. So think about a moment. You have a community, have these moments, and these moments keep coming. It's not like a single moment, but there's one that kind of sets you apart. And do good in the world. Again, your moments are bigger. We did other stuff beyond that. We're doing all these series about women in hardware. We did this little collaboration with the Jane Goodall Institute, even gave money to Jane Goodall. We took our team once to Bali to build a second version of Hackster for 3 weeks, and we paid for this whole thing. We all live in one house on the beach. So there's a lot of weird things that you should do for your team and for your partnership to kind of make sure that you have that moment. The DeLorean, by the way, please rest assured, was rescued. It's been adopted by somebody in Seattle, and now it's in a sanctuary. It's being humanely raised. It's eating grass-fed stuff, and it's good. Partnerships. Okay, so we'll talk about partnerships. Partnerships are huge for communities. You're nobody when you have a community. You need to have those partners that help you grow. So focus on partnerships with companies and communities that are much larger than yours. Provide the partners a service that help you both grow. It's not just about you, about them too. What do you do to help them grow? plan active activities with partners. Don't just have a partner, do things with them, do events with them, do contests with them, workshops, webinars, do a lot of stuff. You are the content engine at the end of the day. What else? Make them happy. You can grow from a single partner between 1% to even 20% of your community. It's incredible. Our partnership with Arduino, for example, I can't even tell you, it's probably more like 30% growth because of a single partnership. And use these relationships with large companies to shine light on great ideas and open innovation. You know, we'll show up on the Microsoft homepage, on an Infineon homepage. It's amazing. So people from our community get this amazing spotlight because we create these partnerships for them. Always follow the principles with the partners. Always try to put banners on your site. Just say no. And even though most of your partners are not open source, everything on Hackster is open source. You know, so everything has to be open. And the one thing that we love the most, we have this Robin Hood business model, which is really not the best business model. You call it take from the rich, give to the poor. So if you just, there's so many amazing innovators out there that do stuff, but they can't pay us anything. And even though we need to make money, because otherwise we'll shut down. So if you're like a small company, just for those of you who know us, we won't charge you anything. Everything we do is free. But if you're a large company, we'll double charge you. So you can pay for the other guy. The fifth thing, or content. So remember, you exist truly also for content. So keep your community super busy. You know, give them, providing with technical workshops, product webinars. Do amazing blogs by guys like Alistair. Where's Alistair? Here, right here. Just learned yesterday, he's also a PhD, astrophysics. So he's an amazing writer. He knows so much what's going on, in the hardware community and open source and different innovation. So we work with a variety of, a bunch of bloggers. We don't blog ourselves a lot because what do we have to say really? It's the people in your community that have to say, and they have a voice and they can write well. So we got Alex Lear, which we're very grateful for. And he writes for a bunch of other companies too, even our competitors. I hate that thing. We don't have competitors. We all have friends. Do meetups. We have, for example, 60 ambassadors for Hackster worldwide. At some point, they'll even run events that have over 1,000 people every month attending our events. And these events are just for free, and they get to learn about new things. Design contests. We're doing all these design contests all the time. So we already gave over 3,000 kits from our partners to people in the community. People in places and countries, they have no access or no affordability to buy anything, or even have the money, they couldn't even buy it. All of a sudden they have access to things, and then they get scholarships, they get into schools, they get jobs because of that, which is incredible. We gave over $650,000 in just cash and prizes to our community because of that, and we didn't give it, our partners did. 20% of all of our content come from our contests, and 80% of all our revenue come from contests. So contests are awesome. People love contests. Social media, remember that most of your community members, they don't really live on your site. They don't show up on our site on Hackster every day. They're actually on Facebook and Instagram and, well, Reddit and other places. So make sure you meet them over there too. Don't just meet them where you are. You don't expect people to come see you. See them where they actually hang out. There's other parks that they like that are nicer than your park. And then think about your newsletters. Newsletters are awesome, but focus on your core value. If ours was about learning, so newsletter is about learning, about sharing what people can learn. It's not about selling them products, etc. Newsletters are great for ads, but just don't focus on ads, because again, you're going to ruin your newsletter. And by the way, don't take every ad, because some ads are just obviously are ads, and if it's obviously an ad, people are just going to delete it and just going to think that you're just trying to sell them stuff. So none of that. Be very, very specific and understand your audience. I think I made it to the end, kind of. So at the end of the day, we, and also if anybody wants to build a community, really think about who you are. So we just want to be a community for hardware developers, makers, and hackers that is friendly, it's approachable, it's curated. You can't just post anything to it. It has to be good stuff. It has to be complete. Well organized, beautifully designed. We happen to like design, so it's not kind of hackerish. It's pretty. Without serving banner ads, without selling people's names, without tolerating trolls, without doing all these, startup, I'm going to do another funding run. We did take some money. We took $150,000 to start this thing, and we never took money from anybody ever again. Because it's that game we didn't want to be part of. And we also didn't want to mix analog signal with cupcake recipes. It's a bit of an instructable stab. It's not fair. I love cupcakes, and I think that it's okay. But that's what we want to do. And thank you. And before I go, you need this. For Alex, right here, keeping bears here, we made skateboards, and we call them the glow boards. And if you buy this Hackspace magazine from Raspberry Pi, it's on shelves, I think, in the next couple of weeks or so. You get to win a Hackster skateboard. Thank you very much. Good too. If you have any questions. I know it was more of a stand-up comedy, but you might have questions.
One question.
Yes. Cool. It's a good question. What's a business model besides selling content? So, by the way, also everything should be transparent. So we put it on the website, including all of our pricing, so /business. So everything is focused on education, right? So we tell people you can buy a contest and serve it on Hackster. You can buy a workshop and serve it on Hackster. You can buy an event. We'll do an educational event, and we'll do it for you. So we do events, workshops, webinars, etc., that companies get to actually put on Hackster. Or we can even embed Hackster on people's websites. If you're a big company, we'll charge you. If you're a small company, we won't charge you. So Hackster becomes a white label community within websites. Yes? That's the worst question somebody can ask me, because we are able to scale. This community is growing so fast, it's overwhelmingly fast, but we're not sure how to scale the business without ruining the business. So it's a good question, but we're trying to think about more educational scenarios that will scale up the business model. But that's, by the way, why a lot of communities end up selling to a larger company, because it's not the best business, but it's a necessary must, and it's something you have to have, and it's fun to do too. So it's a great addition to a larger company, but not as a standalone business. If you want to make lots of money and just start a community, that's probably not a good business model, because you can sell them out.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you. All right, Mario, are you here? All right. Yay, Mario. Last talk before lunch.
Yeah.
Get you wired in.
Okay, HDMI. Okay, here. Let's see if it works.
Let's see if it works.
And okay,
Looks good.
mirror. Okay.
Great.
Okay, hi all. I'm Mario from El Salvador, from the open source. Oh, it doesn't work well. Sorry, give me a second. I don't know what. Okay. Okay. No, it's on the other side. Okay, sorry, I just bought this computer last week because mine failed, so I will do it in the worst way possible. Okay, okay, thank you for giving us this time. I'm part of the open source hardware community there in El Salvador, where we were the first branch outside the USA, so we have a couple of years around here. And I wanted to show you a little bit of my country, if this computer lets me. Okay, it's not working. Okay, I had to turn back there. Okay, I come from this place. You can see it's a beautiful place. We have warm water whole year, so if you want to visit us, you are going to have a good time. And I have been working with open source hardware since I was very young. That makes sound strange because it's something very recent. But the reason for why I'm telling you this is because essentially my father is a technician that worked fixing laundry machines and air conditioners. And I remember that when I was young, I always asked him how he managed to fix things. And one day, he opened the door of one of these washing machines and showed me the schematic and told me something like, okay, you look at the schematic, you see how it works, and you replace whatever you want. Certainly, this is not the open source that we know now, but what I can tell you is by the time that he was working, that were even more open than the 99% of things that we have around us. So his influence made me to choose electronics in high school, because we have this technical high school that teach you electronics. And that was not a coincidence, because there was a time when the Texas Instruments had a factory there in El Salvador, and they needed skilled workers for their factory, so they modified the educational curricula of the high school institutions in a way that they can get skilled workers. Actually, Texas Instruments closed in El Salvador around 1985, the year that I was born. But their educational content is still the same up to this day. And that means that there are many places in El Salvador where you can learn basic electronics and you can learn this kind of things that we are not using. Obviously, I went to the university and I started to study computer science. That is certainly related to open hardware. And I started working with these people from the National Environmental Observatory. And their work is to monitor all the natural hazards that our country is exposed. And what I mean with this, we have earthquakes. Just to give you an idea, we have a quake about 5 or 6 Richter every week. So I was looking at your constructions here, and if we made the buildings the way that you made it here, it's possible that we couldn't have any buildings there. So it's really interesting because we are exposed to all kinds of natural hazards. We have tropical storms. We are exposed to tsunamis. We have a lot of volcanoes. They are beautiful. You can visit them in one afternoon if you want. We are a really small country. It's about the size of Massachusetts, just to give you an idea. And the problem they are facing is that we have a lot of small emergencies, and they are really hard to predict, because, you know, when you have such small country, you need a lot of data, because when you get closer and closer and closer and you try to make predictions, you need more data than you will need for a big country, for example. So what the government is trying to push is to make these low-cost meteorological stations that could help to complete the data that they cannot get by the satellite images. And the question is, how we can link everything together with the government, with the open source hardware community, and what we are doing. What we are trying to do is to use open source hardware to build some kind of network. In this case, many of you maybe know about the Things Network. So we're trying to, instead of buying this expensive access point, we are trying to tell the people, hey, just spend a little quantity of money and put a do-it-yourself gateway. It doesn't matter if it's just one channel. If we get enough, we can cover the city, because the city is actually pretty small. And the idea is that we can make the people to join this movement to try to complete the data that is missing from the National Environmental Observatory. And the other thing that is happening, and it's really interesting, is that the government is doing this robotic educational program, and we have almost 400 schools working with a combination of open source hardware and another proprietary solution that I want going to mention. So the idea is that we can put them together. If we can see the people from the Ministry of Environment and the people from the Ministry of Education, we can actually convert the whole city in an experimentation playground when they can build these, let's say, these sensors that can be built easily, that can be maintained by the community, and can help to complete this missing data that we need to make decisions. The book definition about resilience is this capability of the systems to recover when they are modified. And actually what we think is that the only sustainable way to make a community resilient if they have the means and the tools and let's say the knowledge to really gather the data, to take decisions based on that data, and to share what we are doing. And we truly believe that if we can get this project working in El Salvador, it could be easily replicated in other places. So I don't have many more to do because I know that many of you maybe are hungry. So thanks for your time, and if you want to join us, any help is welcome. And I don't know, have a nice afternoon. Thank you.
Right. So it is lunchtime. We will break for lunch right now. At 1:15, there will be a screening of a video here in the main auditorium. It's Red Hat and open source stories, and our own executive director, Alicia Gibb, will be in it. So come on back for that, and then the full program will begin at 1:45 back here. So enjoy your lunch, enjoy the nice sunny day, and we'll see you back here in a little bit. Thank you.